can I get UCLA into the college football playoffs? It was only my third year in Los Angeles, but I had brought in the #1 recruiting class for the second year in a row, and after winning a Big Ten championship last season, we were projected to be a top 10 team. Additionally, quarterback Robert Armstrong had an incredible offseason, and even though Tom Reed was the only returning starting wide receiver, there were 4 other former 5-star recruits behind him, so we had a ton of depth. And unfortunately for Colorado State fans, they found that out the hard way today. Sophomore Sean Johnson caught his first collegiate touchdown ever here, and then the freshman Jimmy Babcock did the same the next possession, who's obviously not related to Bobby Babcock. I mean, even Kevin Martin caught his first touchdown, who is also a freshman, and I know it's Colorado State, but it seemed obvious that we were going to have an amazing year as the offense looked practically unstoppable with all of these new receiving threats. We definitely took care of business, and although that was a nice start to have, everything was on the line the next week because I returned to Louisville to coach against my old team, and some of my old players weren't happy to see me. The Cardinals had been on a decline ever since I left, and even though they hadn't been terrible, they hadn't won an ACC championship or made the college football playoffs ever since I left the Ville. Midway through the third quarter, we actually found ourselves down by 14 points, and I was starting to get worried that I was going to get outcoached by my old defensive coordinator. However, Robert Armstrong and Tom Reed came up extremely clutch on a long 4th and 10, and we were able to get right back into it. By the fourth quarter, we were fighting to tie it up, and Sean Johnson continued to show off his big playability, taking this one for over 50 yards, and that set us up perfectly just for Jimmy Babcock to drop this touchdown. His freshman side was showing tonight, and that was going to cost us the game in the end, which was extremely frustrating. If we wanted to make the college football playoffs now, we would probably have to win out, and we had to play at the Big House next. Robert Armstrong ended up delivering a laser to get us on the board first, but Michigan was very quick to respond back, and the drops just continued to haunt us. I couldn't stand coaching in the rain anymore, and if we lost because of that again, I was going to completely lose it. After that score, Michigan ended the first half with a kick return for a touchdown, and they just kept getting lucky, like recovering this fumble, so honestly, it wasn't looking good for us at all. But Greg Ridgway scored here, and he kept our hopes alive. With about 2.5 minutes left, we were still behind 10 until tight end Rick Young held on to this one, so we had our chance, and all we needed was one more stop, which we got, putting the game in the hands of my offense. I couldn't believe Dan Cox attempted a one-handed catch in this scenario, but I didn't even have a chance to get upset at him about it because just a couple of plays later, Robert Armstrong made an incredible run for us, and that set up this game-winning touchdown to Sean Johnson. I couldn't believe we escaped with a win, but that was what we needed to get back on track because the rest of our schedule was extremely tough. I was starting to think that we were the unluckiest team in college football. I mean, how did we go from what should have been a 4th down stop to giving up a 16-yard run? Frustrating stuff like that is why we started off down 10 to Penn State, but Greg Ridgway wanted to get us back in it, and he got wide open for an easy touchdown here, but that didn't matter. Instead, Robert Armstrong would throw the pass of the century to the other team, and we would fall behind by even more points to the Nittany Lions off of multiple missed tackles. Fortunately, we did end the first half with a touchdown of our own, and I was thrilled that we opened up the third quarter by Tom Reed pulling off a huge play, but once again, I just felt like the universe didn't want us to win. Sean Johnson dropped what would have been 6, and if it weren't for an interception that put us in scoring range, we wouldn't be in it. With 2 minutes left, we actually got the ball back from the Nittany Lions, and I hated that every game recently was coming down to the wire, but at least we had a chance, and it all came down to the final play where Robert Armstrong showed off his clutch gene. We barely got by Penn State at home, and the difficult games were never ending as we were hosting undefeated Nebraska in the rain, so you know there were a ton of drops. Fortunately, we were the first team to get on the board though, and I'm not quite sure why Nebraska was ranked 11th in the country because their defense was atrocious. They went into the half down by 7, and that was the closest they'd ever get as Dan Cox and Robert Armstrong were hooking up for unbelievable plays. We ended up scoring 49 points, and since a load of recruits visited the school this week, we pulled in a ton of commits. Ever since I started coaching at UCLA, we had never beaten Cal, but I couldn't watch that happen for the 3rd time in a row as this team was far too talented for that. With less than 2 minutes left in the first half, we had held the Golden Bears to 0 points and we were moving the ball, but Wendell Johnson went for a one-handed grab for no reason, so we had to settle for a field goal. By the fourth quarter, Cal finally scored, and that's when the game turned into the the Greg Ridgway Show. He put us in a position to go up by 6 points, and now the result was in the hands of our defense, who should have ended it here, but instead they waited until 4th and inches to somehow get the stop, and we got to leave Berkeley with a massive win. The following week at Illinois, Robert Armstrong was on his A game, as he had 4 passing touchdowns before the end of the half, and he would have had more if it weren't for the rain. I mean, Sean Johnson was just selling all day for him, but in the end it wouldn't matter because my offense still outscored Illinois by plenty of points. Greg Ridgway had a couple of nice touchdown runs, and we were now 6-1, which tied us for the top of the division. Since we were both undefeated in conference play, this game alone could decide who won the Big Ten West, and we got off to a great start. But before we can finish the rest of the game and the season, I have to tell you how I'm getting all of these amazing recruits, and it's due to today's video sponsor, Prize Picks. With the NFL playoffs going on right now, there's not a better time to get the app, and you can play in over 30 states, so there's a good chance yours is eligible. Anyways, you're probably wondering what Prize Picks is, and on there you simply pick 2 to 6 players and higher or lower on their projections, and if you're correct you can win up to 25x the money, but I just think it makes watching sports more entertaining, so if you want some free cash to start out with, code BORDER, the first link in my description, will double your initial deposit up to $100, so if you put in like $20 you'll get $40, and they have every sport you can think of, so you might as well take advantage of that. But now we have to get back to our game against Wisconsin, where Greg Ridgway had already found the end zone twice, and we went into the half up by 4, so I was happy with how we were playing. I knew we couldn't lose to Wisconsin again like we did last year, and with the way Robert Armstrong was playing for us today, I knew he felt the exact same way. With about 4.5 minutes left, we needed to get a goal line stand, and we were holding up pretty well. By 3rd down, they still hadn't scored, but of course, in the end, it wouldn't matter. Anyways, at least we stopped the Badgers on the 2-point conversion, but after they held us to just 3 points, they had a chance to go down the field and send it to overtime. However, safety Cole Morton had other ideas. Not only did the senior get his 2nd interception of the day here, but he hit another gear as he accelerated past everybody on Wisconsin and sealed the game for us. Now that we led the Big Ten West, all we had to do was win out in conference play, and with how good our offense is, I think that's more likely than not. Greg Ridgway was on it today, and he just kept scoring, so beating Northwestern wasn't too hard. He was actually on the Heisman watch list, and the odds of him winning weren't great, but if he kept this up, who knows what could happen. Greg Ridgway was him, and he's the only reason we were able to outscore the Minnesota Gophers, as he was a threat on the ground and in the air. He had 4 total touchdowns in our win, and we were climbing the polls, but Iowa had been one of the best teams in the Big Ten for years now, so winning at Kinnick Stadium was always a challenge. Luckily, junior Tom Reed finally did something for the first time in weeks, and even if he was a little bit of an inconsistent performer, when he was on, it was well worth having him on the team. By midway through the 3rd quarter, my offense continued to find their way into the end zone, but it still all came down to one final possession where junior Dustin Noel forced this turnover. From there, it was all on Greg Ridgway to burn through the rest of the clock, which he did, putting us at 10 wins on the year. I had never beaten USC in my time as the Bruins head coach, but I was ready for a change, and Sean Johnson silenced the Trojans' home crowd with this 90-yard touchdown. I couldn't think of a better way that we could have started this rivalry game, as we took a 2-possession lead with 2 minutes left in the first half, and for the first time ever, beating USC actually seemed possible because we controlled the entire game from start to finish. I won the victory bell for the first time, and now it was time for the conference championship games. Robert Armstrong actually regressed this year, but as a team, we played better, so I think that's why we still ended up being successful. Anyways, the Big Ten championship was set, and we were taking on number 6 Maryland, who only had 1 loss this season, so I was thrilled that Jimmy Babcock got us on the board first. He had a decent role for this team as a freshman, but this was the best I'd seen him play all season, and I was shocked at how easily we were rolling through the Terrapins. I mean, it wasn't even close, and it took Maryland almost 3 quarters to finally score. Obviously, we held on to win our 2nd straight Big Ten championship, and that put us into the college football playoffs as a 2 seed, but unfortunately, it didn't get us a Heisman winner. I finally got UCLA into the playoffs, and our first game was against Alabama, but we started on a bad note as we fell behind 14 early. However, things turned around pretty fast. To start the 2nd quarter, Robert Armstrong put this throw perfectly on the money to sophomore receiver Dan Cox for a 70-yard touchdown, and we were on a mission to hold the Crimson Tide to just 3, which we were able to do, so that gave us the ball back back with time to score before the half, and of course, my offense delivered. Alabama started the second half by scoring 6 on us, and on the other side of the ball, they were dominating. So with 3 minutes left, we were trailing by 13 until Robert Armstrong threaded the needle to Tom Reed. After that, we had to get a stop to get the ball back, and I don't know how he escaped this tackle, but in the end, my defenders didn't shoot the gaps right, and that would be the end of our season. We were put out of the playoffs by Alabama, who would lose to Syracuse in the championship, and I knew I had a lot of work to do in the offseason.